record it. Got it? Okay. And with that being said, let me give a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll hop in, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end, and then we'll talk a little bit about upcoming events. But as far as tonight goes, tonight's presentation will explore the intersection of lighting with environmental justice, acknowledge just and unjust lighting practices, and empower community-based lighting design. We as an audience will be challenged on our assumptions of who deserves quote unquote good lighting and beneficial darkness through historical precedent and case studies. The goal of this presentation is to empower and disrupt the hierarchy of design expertise to include a quote citizen designer in the equation. Our learning objectives, and for those of you who do not know, you can get learning objectives if you stay through the whole thing. And if you do, I'll put the link in and you can get credit for them. But our learning objectives are, number one, to describe how quality is a signifier of power, status, and privilege, and how it is often denied in impoverished communities. Number two, analyze how lighting has historically been used unjustly for surveillance, policing, and community control, and describe how overlighting is an environmental justice issue. Number three, empower communities to embrace citizen-based practices to overcome lighting inequities and educate clients, colleagues, and the public on how lighting design can be linked to community advocacy and the creation of educational tools. And number four, prioritize lighting revitalization for under-resourced communities as a positive public investment. Obviously, a really important topic. And we have two experts today. We have Edward Bartholomew, and I'm going to give you his bio in the most theatrical way I can. Edward Bartholomew is the principal of Bartholomew Lighting, a Black-owned design consultancy based in Cambridge, Mass. He has more than 30 years of experience designing sustainable, inspiring, and award-winning architectural lighting systems. Edward is an invited speaker on lighting technology, energy efficiency strategies, and social justice at regional, national, and international conferences. In addition, Edward co-teaches lighting at Morgan State University and RISD. Edward has an MFA in architectural lighting design from Parsons School of Design. He is a professional member of the International Association of Lighting Designers and is a LEED accredited professional. Edward serves on the IES Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Respect, the DEIR committee, and the DLC Industry Advisory Council. In addition, Edward is a founding member of Black Underrepresentation in Lighting and Design, which is Build Up, and then recently formed lightjustice.org, a lighting social justice resource and forum. So definitely check that one out, lightjustice.org. And we also have tonight with us Glenn Schrum. Glenn transitioned from architecture to lighting to pursue the creative opportunity of light's profound effect on space and people. He has presented a variety of topics to local, regional, and international groups, including events in Turkey, Brazil, Spain, France, Colombia, Mexico, Italy, Sweden, Denmark, Canada, and throughout the USA. He maintains a dual professional identity as an associate professor of lighting design and interdisciplinary practice at Parsons School of Design in New York City, and is the founding principal of Flux Studio. I'm really, really excited to hear from both of them. So thank you both for your time in this topic. And with that, I will hand the conversation over to Ed.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Truly appreciate it. I am sharing my screen. There you are. So yes, we are utilizing Slido. So we're going to have some interactive polling happening. First, I want to thank everyone for joining us for this event. And I want to also thank my co-creator, Glenn, for doing this with me. And we're excited about what we have to present. So hang on.
Yes, thank you everyone, and thank you to the IES Boston chapter for inviting us to do this, and Sarah for your gracious introduction.
Yeah. I'm just going to minimize some things on my multi-screen thing happening here. And oops. So go ahead, Glenn.
So we wanted to start our presentation by establishing an agreement across the community of attendees and us. We recognize that this conversation is going to kind of challenge many of us, and we want to invite everyone to recognize and respect a few kind of core ideas. The first one is that we are inviting participation, but it's optional and not mandatory. We recognize that as many people as we can have participate will help us to build a collective understanding of where things are today, and it's really no specific implication of how things might be once ideas like this start to take hold. We respect all answers that anyone would put, and we invite everyone else to have that same level of respect. When we talk about issues of race and societal systematic issues that impact people in long-standing ways, they may be uncomfortable discussions, but they're not meant to be hurtful discussions. We're going to do this polling, and one of the reasons why we're using this Slido tool is that all interactions in the polls are anonymous. We encourage everyone to speak up, and we're trying to establish a safe place for this sharing. Owning your impact as much as your intent is an important thing that we don't always recognize. Sometimes we think if we don't mean wrong, and then it isn't, we're not hurting anyone, or somehow it's not having as big of an impact. And here we really wanted to underscore that we're going to do our best to create an environment that supports this important conversation during this talk. And it may be uncomfortable, but our hope is that it'll allow for more open conversations about these issues now and in the future. These are long-standing issues that we're trying to address, and it really requires everyone to be able to improve upon past wrongs. And then lastly, we acknowledge that we are standing on the ancestral lands, and we honor the thousands of enslaved Africans whose lives were physically and spiritually stolen.
Thank you, Glenn. So to frame this conversation, we're really looking at the issue of environmental justice. And it's an important part of the struggle to both improve and maintain a clean and healthy environment, especially for those who have traditionally lived and worked and played closest to the sources of pollution, such as landfills and industrial plants, truck depots, highways, places that are incredibly toxic. So to quote the father of environmental justice movement, Dr. Robert Ballard, it is the right of all individuals to have safe, clean, livable, and sustainable environment. The goal is to not allow artificial characteristics such as race, class, or geography to impede that right. So currently, the Environmental Protection Agency defines the environmental justice challenges that impact communities of color. The list includes lead contamination, unhealthy drinking water, dangerous air quality, hazardous waste, site exposure, but the overexposure of harmful lighting is not listed. This raises urgent questions about how we as lighting professionals, how do we understand and address environmental justice inequities? And does lighting actually have an environmental justice impact? And if it does, how can we address this harm caused by environmental injustice? As lighting folks, we all know what is good lighting. And we try to create it on our projects, and we participate in many exciting and fun, stimulating, and inspiring projects. We know that these projects have to be visually attractive, environmentally benign if we follow sustainability and promote that, and socially positive. But we also understand that lighting actually has a wealth bias. And it's actually light's ability to characterize space as either appealing or unappealing furthers those divisions that exist between rich and poor. And it's important for us to acknowledge that. It's by Isabella Creator in her essay, The Public Lighting and the Urban Wealth Gap at Brown Political Review. Our recommended practices are pretty well spelled out. And we know that the IES and IDA, the International Dark Sky Association, spelled this out quite clearly in their 5 principles. Light needs to be, for outdoor use, needs to be useful, should have a clear purpose, should be targeted, only directed where it needs to be, and should have low light levels. Light should be no brighter than necessary, and should be controlled. Light should only be used when it is useful, at the times that it needs to be used, and the color temperature should be appropriate. Those basic 5 principles we all understand and adhere to. And if we look at the ideas of beneficial darkness, we understand that darkness can be a comforting coolness of shade, a reduction of the minimal lighting, tree canopy cover that can create really nice atmosphere for us all. And basically, darkness is an amenity that's afforded to many affluent neighborhoods, but not typically to urban citizens. So when we look at both beneficial darkness and we look at lighting and the positive attributes of lighting, we understand those qualities. We understand how those qualities can benefit a community and benefit the projects that we've worked on. When we talk about beneficial darkness, and this is an aspect that is the flip side of what we talk about when we talk about quality lighting. It's affluent neighborhoods tend to have appropriate darkness balanced with visually comfortable outdoor lighting at night. But marginalized neighborhoods tend to lack the shade and suffer substandard lighting at night, which denies them the benefits of nighttime darkness. And it's getting worse. So light pollution is becoming a larger problem in our society. It has increased. A recent study that used satellite imagery to determine observable light emissions that they have increased by at least 49% from the years 1992 to years 2017. So to quote anthropologist Celeste Henry of the University of Texas at Austin, she first says, many practices of illumination are framed by notions of social progress and are complicit, if not actively participate, in the devitalization, racialization of space. Indeed, in the US, the urban poor, the Black, the brown, are corralled in inner city by processes of white flight and racial criminalization. They have suffered under this trajectory of illumination. Collectively, we appear to be creating a humanity that is slowly cut off from its connection to the wild, to the sensory, and cyclical, to the cosmic, and boldly to each other. So what is the impact? In a landmark study called Light Pollution Inequities in the Continental United States, a distributive environmental justice analysis, the researchers from the University of Utah were the primary researchers, concluded that light pollution is an emergent environmental health hazard. The environmental justice study looked at the exposure to ambient light at night in the USA, and it looked at social inequities in exposure to this light. And they were able to map the radiance of light coming from satellite imagery to the neighborhoods and to the income levels of the people who resided in those neighborhoods. So they were able to truly look at the social inequities of that exposure. And they found that Hispanic, Black, Asian, and multi-other race residents reside in brighter areas. And they accounted for both rural and urban areas. So low to mid social economic status residence areas were exposed from their study, were exposed to more light at night than affluent neighborhoods. So when we look at a typical city, we know that positive lighting at night separates a space, it makes it comfortable, it makes it feel secure and safe, and gives us a reassurance as we walk through these types of cities. So we know that we could revitalize environments like this old industrial area in Charlotte, North Carolina, and make it a thriving, active space that's fun to enjoy with the family and that we could all enjoy. At the same time, when we look at other environments And we don't often look at these environments. We notice that unjust lighting can be quite hostile. And we look at certain patterns of lighting, especially on the street, where lighting is focused mostly on the street or on property for security reasons, that these environments do not invite placemaking, they do not invite comfort. They make people appear threatening when in fact, they're just living their lives because of the positioning of the light. And the light's focused mostly on roads and property instead of people. So as we, again, explore these areas, we notice that not only is it overlit, but in many cases, it's deficiently lit. So there's no planned way of putting the lighting where it needs to be. The lighting is simply haphazardly placed and typically unshielded and very glary, which makes visibility, actually it hinders visibility, especially for people. So this becomes a very hostile, becomes a very unjust form of lighting. As we traveled through Charlotte and we saw these places, it was quite easy to identify where these places were and how uncomfortable it was for the people who lived there. So that brings us to our first question for Slido. The question is, what is the cause for unjust, deficient lighting in neighborhoods? And you can use 1 or 2 word answers. And we're going to show the results after you guys have input your answers.
So it's going to be challenging to find 1 or 2 words to define this unjust and deficient lighting, but we're going to display the results as a word cloud. So our goal is to try to look for ways that there might be alignments in what these responses are. And
you're
it's
anonymous.
Also, yes, they are anonymous. It looks like someone entered the term in the Zoom chat. So we'd like everyone to add it to this Slido tool so that we can view all the responses. So another aspect of this question that's a bit challenging is that you might understand and define different reasons for causes for unjust lighting and deficient lighting. And so in that scenario, you could just maybe focus on one of the 2 terms and add both of those statements as a way for us to kind of build an understanding about the relationship of those 2.
11 responses so far. Give it a couple more minutes. Actually, not a couple more seconds. Actually. Great. All right, shall we do it? Powerful. Yeah, I definitely was not expecting that. Well, infrastructural racism absolutely shows up a lot. And in my studies and doing the research for this, with my dear colleague, Mark Loeffler, racism. And it's funny, when you mention money, clearly the economics of providing lighting, these are under-resourced communities, so they have a lack of money. They don't have these resources to do these type of things. They don't have resources to even afford an expert like ourselves to work on these projects. So money and resources are absolutely lacking.
And there are a few of the responses here that start to suggest the application of the light and how that might lead to different levels of contrast. So when we see spacing, how that from a design perspective might lead to some of these conditions where you're going in and out of the light. And all of the budget and financial answers really seem to point to the power dynamic related to light as it currently exists.
Even when you look at something like spacing, you realize that you're utilizing fewer resources spread out over pole distances, and you're probably adding more light onto those things. So technically, it's absolutely spacing, but really, if you look at the social implication, it's under-resourced, and how to, how you have to do more with less in that way.
It's also interesting to see the reference to technology. One disappointing aspect of urban lighting, specifically in recent years, is that so many cities have been doing LED conversions, and in the process, the light quality has not been improved. There have been times where the light levels have been increased, but the overall quality of the light is, if anything, has deteriorated, even though there was a significant investment that just occurred.
All right, so I'm going to move on. So in looking at this, one of the things that we found in our research that kept showing up for a reason that the lighting was so harsh and there was so much overlighting and deficient lighting happening in certain neighborhoods, actually had to do with crime. And so to quote Michel Foucault, who utilizes the idea of the panopticon, said the panopticon, which is a model for a prison where you have a centralized focus of supposedly a watchtower, and all the cells are radial around this centralized tower. So people constantly feel watched. It was actually conceived by Jeremy Bentham in the 1800s to be a disciplinary tool for criminals. And it functions this as a permanent surveillance of the prisoners. Well, lighting's become somewhat like that. And it allows people, as they put more and more tools onto the fixtures, cameras, sensors, all these different things, it becomes a way of surveilling people in these communities. That is not applied in affluent communities. It simply isn't. So when we look at the panopticon, it creates a consciousness of permanent visibility as a form of power, where you don't need bars, chains, and heavy locks are not necessary for domination anymore. So lighting can actually be a tool of oppression and surveillance. And this goes back historically in America. One of the laws that was passed during slavery was called the Lantern Law. And basically, if you were a slave and you were walking around at night, you had to have a candle or a light source. And if you didn't, anybody was deputized to punish you for not having that light source. So if you were walking around without someone white with you, that was what would happen to you if you didn't have a light source. And so these lantern laws were in New York and in Boston, and they were ways to oppress Black people during these times, utilizing using light in that way of oppressing people. And that carried forth when you look at the Green Book, which was a way for Black motorists to find safe havens, because there were literally 10,000 towns that had laws that after dusk, Black people and people of color and other minorities could not be in those towns. And so the Green Book was a way to navigate the roads in America to find safe havens, places where you could actually find lodging and food, where you wouldn't be punished for being in those towns. So again, controlling nocturnal behavior at night, it becomes, it's part of kind of a history happening in America. And this history gets exasperated when you look at redlining, which was a practice that started in the 1930s. And it basically categorized certain neighborhoods or areas of high credit risk. And so that on the basis of race or ethnicity. So people were basically corralled into these areas, and they basically drew a red line. And it was, even though it was outlawed in 1968, those areas that were separated and had lower property values, well, that has continued on. The redlining impact of that continues on in a reduction in wealth and home ownership. 3 out of the 4 neighborhoods that were redlined on government maps 80 years ago still continue to struggle economically. So methods that the police and communities have taken to try to control and quote unquote, fight crime in certain neighborhoods. One of the methods happened in Detroit, Project Greenlight, where they would actually have business owners put in a green light and it would indicate that they had a camera. So these areas are being surveilled through cameras. And so the green light indicated which areas were being done that way. So this is a practice that's happened. It also happens in Baltimore. I know Glenn knows about the blue lights that happen. So those also indicate that there are cameras on the light fixtures. So those neighborhoods are being surveilled. They're not in affluent neighborhoods. They simply aren't. And to quote Tawana Petty, when she says, Black communities who have been under-resourced and ignored for decades truly want to be seen and not watched, utilizing the infrastructure of lighting to surveil people, to oppress people, does not create neighborhoods, does not create places that are comfortable, that invite people to want to stay and provide wealth within those communities, and to make those communities worthy of being there, of living there. So we all want that, and every community wants that. So how do we, as lighting people, how do we help make that happen? Well, one of the most egregious examples actually happens in New York City. It's called omnipresence, and it's actually a police program, a New York City police program, in which they installed diesel generator powered floodlights in dangerous parts of the city. These are housing developments in Black and brown communities. And they're still going on, they're still on, they're still happening. This represents one of the harshest examples of using light to oppress people in a community by creating unequal and unjust lighting. It's both light pollution, air pollution, and as Brownsville residents, they call it overwhelming. The light shining into people's rooms, making it hard for them to sleep, and they never turn off. And the buzz of the generator never stops. So this is an example of what this looks like. You see the New York PD insignia on these lights. Unfortunately, there was a study that actually looked at these lights in these communities. The study is called Reducing Crime Through Environmental Design, Evidence from a Randomized Experiment of Street Lighting in New York City. And they concluded that accounting conservatively for potential spillover, that street lighting reduces outdoor nighttime index crimes, those are the most egregious crimes, by approximately 36%. That study alone has been popularized through the popular media so that other cities are taking on the effort of overlighting communities and trying to eliminate crime based on this study. But people don't dig deeper into the study to realize that the study was based on omnipresence. And it is not as rigorous statistically because of the data sample of omnipresence and how they utilized it. No one wants to live under these harsh lights. And the fact that they're placing them only in poor neighborhoods and not in wealthy neighborhoods lets you know that this is not the type of conditions that really help a neighborhood, that build wealth within the neighborhood, that help enrich neighborhoods. This is the type of thing that actually hurts a neighborhood, that makes it feel like a crime scene. And the impact of overlighting has both physical impacts, according to the International Dark Sky, how lighting has increased by, we mentioned before, over 36% over a time period. But another example is a recent study found direct links between excessive outdoor light at night and breast cancer. And it looked at comprehensive data from over 100,000 women across the US from 1989 to 2013. And what they did is they linked satellite imagery at nighttime to residential addresses for each study participant. And they found that the top 20% of women exposed to the highest levels of outdoor light at night had an estimated 14% increase in risk of breast cancer as compared to with women at the bottom 20%. And they considered looking at the compounding of night shift work and how that also impacts residents in these areas. So those workers also often live in those overlit neighborhoods, and they never really escape artificial lighting or have an opportunity to enjoy comfortable and restorative darkness. And then there's mental health aspects to overlighting. In a cross-sectional study in 2020, they found that US adolescents that had higher levels of artificial light at night, measured again through satellite imagery, were associated with later weeknight bedtimes. And that those late weeknight bedtimes actually disrupted those communities and impacted their sleep, which impacts their behavior. The adolescents in areas with greater levels of nighttime light had higher prevalence of mood and anxiety disorders. So these are just indicating the impact of lighting. And there's a recent article in CNN, which, you know, they hopefully got it from a good source, but it looks like light at night can have incredibly disruptive impact both on us both. We know it physically, but clearly also mentally as well. But the positive thing about this is that systems of oppression and injustice and inequities they're designed, but therefore they can be redesigned, says Annette D. Carroll from the Creative Reaction Lab. And so whether these systems were purposely designed or through negligence, we know that they could be redesigned. And that is kind of where we step in as lighting professionals. One of the solutions, and I think a really promising solution, is really looking at how to create community designers. And the Design Justice Network is a wonderful network of designers who are looking at how to work directly in communities to embolden citizen designers so that they're contributing on an equal level with experts to design those environments, to redesign those environments. So they overcome the systemically unjust lighting. It seems that we need to rebalance the nature of the lighting design process, to rethink the lighting designer's role. Now there's a book called Design Justice, the MIT Press, and Sasha Costanza-Chalk says, we see the role of designer as facilitator rather than an expert. They may not be the only expert at the table, but too often we have to jump in as lighting designers, and we look at schematic design, and after critical decisions have already been made, and then we had to play the role of like the lighting authority and a lot of these things. We are so far removed from the occupants and the communities that we are impacting with our lighting because we are typically working for clients or architects, and we simply do not interact directly with those occupants or those stakeholders who are actually impacted. So Design Justice wants to flip that, wants us to actually be in direct contact with the communities that we're interacting with. Now, it's an organization as well, and it reimagines the design process, centering people who are normally marginalized by design, and use collaborative and creative practices to address the deepest challenges. So this is a good template for us to be re-engaged to work directly with communities. Their design principles for Design Justice actually are engage, listen, and when appropriate, educate the community as stakeholders, change the hierarchy from both a lighting expert or any expert, design expert, to citizen expert, and research and identify historical and environmental inequities. Look at the context to what you're designing for, and be contextual in your solutions, and respect the historical nature of those places. Share knowledge generously, and design and specify, of course, with integrity, and not just throw in the cheapest thing or the thing that a friend of yours wants you to specify because they have a connection, but actually design with integrity throughout the whole process. The outputs of Design Justice are not only to repair for past injustices of the physical environment, but to make them fair in the present and remove barriers for the future. That's a quote from Brian C. Lee, Designers Protest collective organizer. But fortunately, the more we looked at this situation, the more we found people who were actually practicing, in a sense, these design justice aspects. One of those people is actually Lenny Schwingding, and she's actually founder of Night Seeing, an international nighttime design initiative. It's a program run by her, and it opens people's eyes to existing nighttime light environments, including understanding lighting systems and its effects. And she's part of the International Nighttime Design Initiative, which is a consortium of 30 interdisciplinary academics and professionals who are applying all their skills and their knowledge to the design of a holistic design of urban lighting design. So their efforts support women taking back the night, which intersects with the support of marginal communities. And then there's Bob Parks, and he's doing some amazing things with the Smart Outdoor Lighting Alliance and his community-friendly lighting program. He actually has a street lighting design process that starts with public outreach and engagement. He strongly recommends mock-ups and working with the public to see exactly the results of what the lighting and how it's going to transform their space with new lighting technologies to reduce glare and improve color. All of those things he explains and works with the community to understand before the design is implemented. So we know we have people who have already championed these ideas. And then there's the London School of Economics and the social light movement. This is actually a program that started in 2014, and it was done at the White Cross State Lighting Workshop. And so it was a lighting workshop where they took a housing development and actually invited the citizens to come in and reconsider their lighting, revitalize their environment with lighting, and trying out, mocking up different conditions and making the lighting a lot more playful, less hostile, and more inviting to everyone who lives there. So they had to understand the outdoor social spaces of the White Cross residents. So you really had to understand what they really need in order to improve the nighttime quality of the state. Now, before any of this happened, most of the residents thought of their bad lighting as unchangeable, like the asphalt or the driveway or the bricks in the building. So by engaging and showing them exactly how you can manipulate light and how lighting can serve them and make their spaces feel both safe, secure, but also enriching, these residents begin to embrace these solutions and apply them in their environment. So we're up to another poll. And the poll is to ask the question of you lighting folks, what characteristics of light best support communities? And these would be 1 or 2 word answers. So what characteristics of light best support communities?
And we are going to hold off on sharing the responses to this answer until after the next portion of the presentation. So you've got some time to think about it. Similar to the last poll, it'll what we'll display is a word cloud that creates larger text out of more frequent responses. So feel free to include multiple responses to the question. And I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation.
I'm going to stop sharing.
Great. Okay, I'm going to talk this evening about a project that we've worked on called Signal Station North. And this project our attempt was to work in a way that was consistent to these principles of design justice that Edward mentioned. In so doing, we really questioned the typical processes and outcomes of lighting design. To kind of refer back to Brian Lee Jr.'s quote, "It's not enough to focus investment, including resources of time and expertise, on areas that have been neglected in the past. We need to meet communities where they are today and try to understand how light can support their current needs and values. And we need to share our knowledge in accessible ways so these communities can establish and maintain positions of power over their nighttime environments in the future. And this is especially important in historically marginalized communities that have consistently and increasingly been discriminated against using light." The Signal Station North project is a defined as a creative placemaking project, and we received a National Endowment of the Arts Our Town grant focused on lighting public spaces of the Signal Station Arts District, which is located in central Baltimore in Maryland, around the train station, the Amtrak station, Penn Station. Baltimore, for those of you that may not be aware, is a city that was ravaged by suburban flight in the 1970s and 80s, leaving large areas throughout the city with high vacancy rates, low investment, and challenged school system. This is the common narrative in the media, but Baltimore is also rich in culture and history, and it has a vibrant creative community that's committed to equity and inclusion. We focused the outcomes of this project on how I'm going to focus this presentation on how the outcomes of this project are different than our typical products of lighting design. We understood that if we were going to engage in these goals of design justice, our work needed to extend beyond lighting layouts and fixture selections, and go beyond these prescriptive solutions in completed lighting installations. We were fortunate to work with an amazing interdisciplinary team, all based in Baltimore. And the funding that we received supported the development of a new approach to our lighting design processes that allowed us to really shift how light could best support the people that use the district at night. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to use the term we, and I'm referring to this incredible team. And one of the key members of the team, the leader of the team, was the Neighborhood Design Center. It's a nonprofit with strong ties to this local community. And they really took the lead and brought expertise about how to engage communities, although they had never worked on a project that was focused on light. We were the lead creative and the lighting design lighting designer with experience in light art and education. Both the Neighborhood Design Center and Flux Studios headquarters are based in this district, so it's very close to home. We also worked with a company called Public Mechanics, a public artist, graphic and web designer, and an architecture firm named Pickle, who has long ties to Baltimore development. So fundamental to our approach was the intent that this work would be made available to anyone that could benefit from it. So this Signal Station North website has detailed information on everything I'm going to be presenting tonight. So we started with really, again, defining how we would approach this problem. We did an urban analysis, which was meant to better understand and document the context for lighting design in this district. So this is the familiar process. We do this often. But given the fact that our focus of this project was really the pedestrian experience, we added components to the analysis, including tree canopies in the district, and analysis that we hadn't done or seen before, which was to look for sites within the district that had high visibility. So this started to inform where investment priority might have the biggest initial impact. So we also did a lighting analysis, and the focus of the lighting analysis was to understand the community lighting conditions. The trends, problem areas, and opportunities were obviously key to informing any of the recommendations that we might give. And as was typically the case, our analysis included both quantitative and qualitative assessment of these existing lighting conditions. But unlike other projects, we weren't hired by an individual property owner or a municipality. So we took that opportunity to focus on issues that are impacting the pedestrian experience that existed between the public and private realm, which in urban lighting and pedestrian lighting are really where the problems often exist, is when the ownership of the lighting is not as clear. So this shift of focus led us to an understanding of the nighttime environment that was more related to the lived experience of a person in the community. We noted how street lighting resulted in areas that appeared dark because of adjacent overlighting. We found some examples where public lighting was significantly trespassing into domestic spaces. And another departure from our typical practices in this lighting analysis was that we had an emphasis on sharing basic technical knowledge so that the community members could have greater power over their nighttime environments in the future. So in this initial lighting plan document, the lighting analysis, we integrated educational materials so viewers could advocate from a more informed position around light. So the previous examples represented some innovations in how we approached the lighting design process, but they were all still grounded in producing information. Now I want to share ways that we engage the community more directly. So we kicked off the Signal Station North project with a fun community-driven event that highlighted the social and transformative power of light and was part of the 2019 Light City Festival, which is a festival that is throughout Baltimore City, but mostly not in this neighborhood and mostly not outside of the areas that are commercial centers and more tourist destinations. So this was a guerrilla lighting event. Guerrilla lighting is a format for an event that was developed by the social light movement that Edward presented previously. They were very generous to have all of the documentation about how to create one of these events as an open source. So we use that as our basis. And it was really a moment for the volunteers and the surrounding community to come together around light. We orchestrated ephemeral lighting compositions for the duration of a few targeted photos. So these photos are really the event, that and the experience of the people that do it. So we identified 4 building sites or 4 sites around the district that were all walking distance. And we specifically tried to identify prominent buildings and sites that don't currently contribute to the nighttime environment. So this historic church looks like it might be which has no lighting at night, was lit temporarily using high power flashlights and 50 volunteers with specific kind of optical accessories and instructions about where to stand. So this interactive demonstration showed the transformative potential of light and collective action. So both the volunteers and passersby could see, even if just for an instant, how light could change their community in positive ways. The other opportunity and the outcome of the lighting design process was that we had opportunities along the way in this event to educate and share how some small changes in lighting can have drastic effects. So having the light flashlight positioned in a location where we would emphasize the texture of the wall in this, or the stone in this church. This is something we know as lighting designers can be determined by being 6 inches further away or closer to the building. So to be able to have that conversation about how when you're working with light, those kinds of changes make a big difference is something that until someone experiences it, they don't necessarily kind of capture how significant it is. So it was an example of how we were working to make lighting more accessible to the community and to not have these issues only be accessible and left to the experts. So hands-on, learning from doing, demonstrating how lighting can be accessible and how it's not left to the experts. But since we had to advance throughout the district en masse and in order to go to the various selected sites, we thought we'd turn it into a party and a parade. So drawing on New Orleans' second line tradition, we hired an incredible local brass band to march and play alongside us as we moved from site to site. It really turned the whole thing into a big party and definitely helped us to bring people along that didn't know what the event was, but once they heard that music, they wanted to see what was happening. So we had some New Orleans music and we had some dark music. It was truly an amazing night. And again, a great way to kick off this event and to share both with the people that participated and the people that live in the community and were around to see, that there was something happening around light. And we learned a lot from this process. There's detailed information on the website about how to organize and design a guerrilla lighting event. There's an entire section dedicated to the flash event if anyone's interested in doing it themselves. We ended the event with food and more music at a community park, and this became the kickoff of the community listening portion of our project. So another key point of difference in the Signal Station North project to planning around lighting is this deep focus on community listening. And the goals of our engagement process include checking our assumptions against what the community actually sees and experiences. So we're not just guessing the way we typically do as lighting designers. Identifying values that people hold around light. What do people value in their place, and how can lighting investment support it? And again, to share an understanding of sources of light and how lighting affects how people use space. So we usually base our designs on assumptions, industry standards, and dialogue, but often with limited user groups. But in the Signal Station North project, we had the benefit of being able to reach more people and to better understand how people want to use this urban space, and really through direct communication. So a cornerstone of our community listening project was extensive interviews with community members. And the responses took the form of a series of mapping exercises and narrative answers to specific discussion points. So this is a composite map where we consolidated all the information that we received and put it into a graphic format that helped to communicate some of what we had understood from the responses. And you see that there were some specific questions about how the members of the community currently use the space, but also questions about how they desired to use the space, this desired nighttime use of various areas. The goal of the mapping exercise was to help us to better understand how members of the community currently navigate the district and how they might navigate it at night if there was different lighting. So language was very important to this kind of engagement. We recognized pretty early on that we could ask the question one way and we'd get one set of responses that might be more close-ended, and then we'd ask it in another way and we'd get a more open conversation, have a more open conversation. So we didn't ask the question, what type of lighting do you want in this location? Instead, we asked the question, what kinds of urban spaces do you like to occupy at night? And we didn't ask, where do you feel safe? Because we know people have biases that more light would make them feel more safe, even though we know that it doesn't always make you feel more safe. So instead, we asked, where do you feel comfortable and uncomfortable in the district at night? And then there were the narrative portions, just conversations with people and letting them go where they go. They were more open-ended, but that presented challenges for how to consolidate and summarize the data that we got. This slide illustrates how we took direct comments from the interviews and then summarized them into brief statements about what lighting could do for the community, what values they hold in light. And we found that if we asked what type of lighting people want in their communities, their responses were often utilitarian, but responses to their values around light were beyond the purely functional. So you can see here that people placed a value on the social and aesthetic qualities of light once we asked them about these values. This community listening process provided insight on how Signal Station North residents and visitors think about lighting in the district and how their hopes and concerns for future lighting interventions align and differ from what we generally think of as good lighting design. So now that we had a better understanding of community values around light, we gained location-specific feedback from the mapping exercises. We had an analysis of existing lighting conditions and the urban context. We needed to develop some more concrete recommendations. So whereas a more typical approach to a lighting project might include outlining prescriptive approaches, like use this light fixture in this location, in this position, instead, in this case, we opted for an open framework that would give community members agency to support a range of different types and scales of lighting interventions in the future, but with an eye to ensuring cohesion across the district, which as lighting designers, we think about, but maintaining this level of flexibility. So to reach communities that might not otherwise participate in these presentations, we have gone on to share these concepts on social media. So I'm going to highlight how they were shared on social media as a way to describe them. So these conceptual recommendations that we made for this project were intentionally flexible and applicable for multiple locations throughout the district. And we identified a series of specific conceptual recommendations. And 3 of these are the funding that we receive for the project allows for us to demonstrate these approaches through pilot projects. So we've been working in co-design methodologies, 3 of the different creative team members with the community to advance these proposals that are about to be implemented. So quite literally, right before this call, I saw the signed contract with the contractor for one of the projects. So with all the sections of the lighting plan completed and community use in mind, as we completed a Signal Station North lighting guidebook, which summarizes these practical information, includes historical resources that were developed as a part of the project, and really represents a concise document of the completed project in an easily accessible format. So the educational callouts that were in the lighting plan got condensed to become this section called How Light Works. Again, with the goal of increasing understanding and language around light as a primary outcome of the project, as opposed to communication of education as just a means to an end of getting our designs approved. So we didn't have any agenda in sharing this information about how light works other than for people to have maybe be less intimidated by it and be open to initiating more lighting design themselves. We also included in this guidebook a community lighting guide. And we found through early community meetings that one of the big questions was, well, how do I engage with the city to do anything about this? I've got this light outside of my bedroom that's putting light in my bedroom all the time. What do I do about it? So we used our expertise to provide guidance about how non-experts can communicate lighting concerns and advocate from a more knowledgeable position with the city, and developed infographics about not just how to understand light in the city, but how to report outages and who to call and other lighting issues to help them to navigate the city's bureaucracy around light. And to complement the online resources, project materials during the course of the project have been made available for free in the district in hard copy format. There are branded newspaper boxes located throughout the district where you can pick up these guidebooks and a zine that was created. So this project revealed how decision makers at the city and the utility selectively engage with communities about lighting. We understand that power required for these public resources to work for your best interest is the direct result of knowledge and collective will. This is how parts of the city get better lighting than other parts of the city. They're better organized, they're better informed, they can pay experts to help them. So we included in the guidebook this gathering support section that outlines some steps that can be taken by individual action that can help to build consensus that can result in positive changes to the lighting environment. So there's so much more to share on this expansive project. There's so much to learn about how designing lighting can be more equitable and done in a more just way. We hope that the examples that were shared tonight might support conversations about the processes and outcomes of lighting design practices so that we can better address equity and inclusion, both in the past, present, and the future. And I'd like to end this presentation of the project with an excerpt from the introduction to the project brief that was written by our primary project collaborator at the Neighborhood Design Center, Merrill Hambleton. Light supports our experience in public space in ways that are obvious and less obvious. It lights our way, yes, but it can also help us to keep time, create a sense of place, or serve as a guidepost. And just as light can invite us in, it can also keep us out. Like so many aspects of the built environment, light holds power and reveals power structure. So I would hope that we can all work together to share this power of light.
Thank you so much, Glenn. That was very powerful. So I want to share the poll results with you. So these are the aspects that our audience thinks supports the community, aspects of light or characteristics of light. Warmth jumps out, glare-free, human-centric, well-shielded.
It's really interesting to look at this list and see how specific it is, and how in some cases, technical language being used to describe how we can best support communities.
Very interesting. So our next will show you what the community said supported these ideas.
So some of the issues that are identified here that really informed our thinking about urban lighting and how we thought about it in a different way was this issue of lighting being a connector between areas of the neighborhood, and thinking about how, again, the limitations of how lighting design is typically completed within the constraints of ownership, building ownership, but that's not how people experience the places, the communities where they live.
And it is quite a contrast into, the prescriptive ways and ways that I think myself as a designer would think about what characteristics of light contribute. It's really interesting to see how the community embraces a different way. It has a different lens in looking at those things. And I think it's really a testament to how your engagement with the community really was about values, and they weren't so much about the technical aspects of light, which is really helpful.
Yes, I mean, I think we can all imagine some kind of mapping of the answers, the responses that came out of the poll of attendees of this conversation against this. So we kind of could map some of the comments to this term comfortable. Like when we talk about low glare, you're not going to have your average person that's aware of how glare might be making them feel uncomfortable, but we know that that's ultimately what they want, is to feel comfortable. And I have not seen a lighting designer refer to a concept as homey. And but the warmth really came through in the survey of this group.
Absolutely, yeah. So there was definitely some alignment. Absolutely, yeah. So one of the things that is occurring is I'm working with a group of people, two people, Mark Loeffler and Leanne Osborne, and we're actually creating a resource for collecting projects like what the Station North project and other great examples of design justice applied to lighting and empowering communities about lighting. So we're creating this resource. It's going to be online, lightjustice.org. Supports the education and advocacy for designers to support underserved communities to improve lighting for safety, security, and placemaking. And I love the aspect of Station North where they were literally looking at how to navigate that public realm, how to navigate with governments and utilities to have them respond, but not just have them respond in a harsh way of throwing up another floodlight, but have them respond in an appropriate way where the lighting is soft and promotes those values that they had mentioned, looking at warmth and looking at comfort, looking at those aspects. And so how to support people in articulating that and how we can support as designers into implementing that. So that's what lightjustice.org. Right now we're in, the site is under construction. And we know that by the end of the month, we're actually, I guess it's gonna be next week, we're gonna launch the first version of it. And we invite you guys to contribute and to check it out and to use it as a resource as well. So it's really an open source resource for these type of light justice and design justice efforts in lighting. Wow. So
these are our top 4 questions.
Yeah. Interesting. Is this thing on? So if you guys have any questions for us, we'd be glad to answer any of the questions that you have regarding this presentation.
Well, Edward, I have a question for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on your experience of looking closely at the streets and the lighting in Charlotte and how that compares to other cities that you've lived and spent time.
Yeah. So I visited Charlotte a lot of it just to explore it as a city and see kind of if we could identify areas of just and unjust lighting. And it's one of those things, once you see it, you cannot not see it. So I think hopefully our audience can understand when they go outside and they walk in certain neighborhoods, it changes. You can see how the atmosphere changes, where there's indiscriminate lighting either everywhere or it's very deficient. And you have floodlights here and another light here, but it's not very organized. And you recognize that even on an unconscious level, but of course, us being practitioners, we see that. So my experience of Charlotte was really interesting because it was actually hard to find unjust lighting, actually. It was actually, it took some effort. And luckily we were able to talk to people who pointed out some areas and we went there. And I realized filming places can be challenging. But we did it, and it was great. It was really, the people of Charlotte were just so wonderful and welcoming. We want to repeat this in other places, to the point that we would invite folks to contribute. We're thinking about a video section of lightjustice.org, where people in other cities can take their phones and videotape areas that they also feel exemplify these type of conditions within those neighborhoods, and then have the tools on the website to remedy those conditions. So Charlotte was wonderful, but it's a unique place, and every place is unique. Baltimore is incredibly unique. Cambridge, Massachusetts has got some places that I could definitely videotape and utilize as well that exemplify both positive experiences of lighting and some very hostile, negative, unjust lighting.
Glenn and Edward, you may be seeing this, but another question, or maybe comment sort of question, is popping up. And while that's happening, I'll encourage everyone else to either pop questions into either the chat or a Slido, or just unmute yourself and ask. But it seems like the question is there a lens that we can be looking at the interior of spaces as well as the exterior?
So yeah, we are looking at that. And I definitely think these issues show up on the interior as well. And so it's something we're looking at and expanding this topic to include the interior. So it would take a lot more research to investigate that. So for those who are interested, please let us know. And we'd love to invite you to be part of the research team in exploring this. Because not only are we identifying negative attributes of lighting and where they're applied or misapplied for certain communities, but also how do we remedy that? And how do we engage as lighting designers, not just for our paid clients, who pay us, and we got to get paid, it's important. How do we get paid also to support underserved communities?
Yes, and I think that some of the co-design and listening parts of the Station North project would work equally well in an interior environment. It depends on the scope of the building that you're kind of talking about and the lighting design that you're talking about. But I certainly think there's a lot of overlap there. But it is the sort of use of light for surveillance on the I don't know, Edward, do you think that is more specific to the exterior environment than the interior environment?
Well, I could definitely say that people, I think us and myself as lighting designers, we tend to light because of legal reasons. We look at the lighting plan. If there's not a dot there, we think people are going to fall into the void of darkness. And so I think we overlight because of those reasons, and maybe less so for surveillance. But security absolutely shows up in certain buildings, and it's overdone and very harsh. I could definitely identify lobbies and passageways and hallways that are overlit and very uncomfortable without considering the human impact of what that lighting is going to do. So, yeah.
So I see the question that came up at the bottom of the Slido poll was the Signal Station North of funded event or project. It most certainly was. We had, this was the really supported our ability to spend as much time as we did as a collective group, and is helping to support the these demonstration projects as well, these pilot projects. So the main grant, this National Endowment of the Arts, Our Town grant, was the seed funding. But then there's a group, a nonprofit that is called the Central Baltimore Partnership, that supports businesses within this district in particular, and then some areas outside of it. And they ended up providing matching funds that were related to a grant that they'd received from the state of Maryland. So, and then there were other local nonprofits that supported it as well. So one of the reasons why we want to make sure that we are as generous in sharing the outcomes of this project as possible, because we recognize that we don't, as these projects don't always have this amount of resources and time.
Sarah, were there anything in the chat that we should be aware of?
I think we just got one that says, does one start by meeting with the police and showing them the error in their ways? Are they interested? Can the funding be redirected? Maybe that's specifically about the omnipresence. Maybe Stephen, you can add color to that.
Yes, it was. I should have been more specific. Sorry.
You know, it's funny you should bring that up. And let's just say there's something in the works where, how, as a lighting community, how do we address omnipresence? How do we address those policies that are egregious in urban communities like New York? And how do we set a policy? How do we set a, how do we let people know that this is not right, and that we as lighting experts are taking a position? How do we, to those folks, to let those police commissioners know that, no, lighting will not solve this problem. Bad lighting will definitely not solve these problems, but well-designed lighting can absolutely support those problems and provide the exact same results without the collateral damage of, say, incarcerating everybody or stop and frisk or something like that. That positive lighting can actually help those communities a lot better than harsh lighting on diesel generators on poles. That is not the way to do it. So it's a permanent investment. And hopefully with the infrastructure funding that's coming down the pike, some communities will take this and not just apply it onto a community, but engage the community to actually have really a positive lighting response and remedy to those communities. So it's going to be more than lighting, of course. It's including all the different aspects within the urban environment, but lighting is clearly an important aspect, and it's a signifier that these spaces, that somebody cares and that people are investing in those spaces.
Ed, I think there's a bit of a follow-up there as well, and you may know off the top of your head and you may not, but are there national conferences for police commissioners and chiefs where we might dedicate some time and energy towards a presentation that kind of brings this to light, no pun intended?
That would be a great audience.
Yeah, I can't help but think that there are huge numbers of people in these communities who don't know, who also think that these giant floodlights on generators are good, right? Because why wouldn't they think, right? Because they don't understand what could be better. So that's a problem.
Absolutely. No, the study, unfortunately, that kind of validated that. That's what was really a problem, that they had a crime study that said, oh, by the way, that worked. And that showed up on newspapers throughout the country. It's still showing up. I just saw another article where people are saying, oh yeah, more lighting absolutely helps. So it's a big problem. You're absolutely right. And we need to get in front of the people of power, police commissioners. It'd be great to talk to them. There is an organization called Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, CPTED. And they have been promoting certain things, but unfortunately, they're not they are in alignment with police, and they are looking at, they have certain strategies, and I've read a lot of their literature, but they're still very naive about quality lighting and also the impact that lighting can have on communities. So they still promote some certain ideas, especially regarding surveillance, that I think is kind of, pretty oppressive in their approach. So, but that is a group that we can also influence and work with. So I think they'd be open to that. but definitely talking to police commissioners and communities, participating in community feedback sessions and community where they're changing or working on certain spaces and going to these sites and talking to people. I love what Station North has done in creating documents, and those documents we could share. Anybody can utilize those documents to educate communities about, here's what the qualities of lighting are. Here's how you navigate the utilities. You know, all those things can help rise the level of people and their knowledge about lighting, so that they could be equal participants in these conversations instead of having it, you know, imposed upon them by the utility, by the police, by those folks, you know.
Ed and Glenn, it looks like Robin had her hand up, and I see you, Robin, but before we go there, there's one other question in the Slido queue. What advice do you have for large municipal or utility street lighting conversations, 3,000 or 50,000 street and roadway lights? There's an opportunity.
So I would point to what Bob Parks is doing, the importance of having mock-ups so the community can see what's being proposed before that kind of larger investment is undertaken. And then certainly having the lighting not just be installed without anyone knowing that it's coming. I mean, you need to meet with the community to have them, if not only be aware, but have some say in it. This was one of the really elusive parts about the Signal Station North project, is that we were working on this lighting plan, and quite literally while we were surveying the light levels, I didn't yet mention the pandemic, but I should say this all happened during the pandemic. They were converting fixtures, and we were seeing light levels quintuple and go over what they had said the requirements were. And we were working on a lighting plan with all the community groups, and no one had any idea what was coming next. Yeah, it was a broken system that way.
And I could say, from having worked at the utility, I watched a lot of these projects happen, and I am ashamed that they did happen. I tried to push back as much as I could. I was literally the only lighting expert at the utility. And there were a few more in New England, but for the most part, I was it. And they were more invested in saving energy, saving money, a lot of maintenance, stuff like that. So the one-for-one replacement, to Glenn's point, would often be way overlit because they were not really doing one-for-one. They were doing like 5-to-1 because the LEDs are so much brighter. They would not consider the use of the space and how the space had changed. So they were just replacing one-for-one. They didn't care who lived there or what was happening in that space, how the space was not even utilized for the same reasons. So they were just doubling down on what was already existing. No engagement with the community at all, not even a little bit. Only when they had a complaint did they have any engagement, and then they put a house-size shield on it. So that's the mentality at the utility, and that's what I saw over and over again. And they were funding those projects to the tune of millions. And I can tell you which communities they were at, but I don't want to get into it here. But that's what happened, and that's still happening to this day. And people are proud. Oh, I saved, you know, so many megawatts, and I did this, and they're proud of those efforts. But they don't ever look at the impact of those efforts and how harsh and how you know, how poor the lighting is. Ultimately, you basically doubled down on really bad lighting and put in really bright 10-year, you know, how long those lights are going to last. They last 10 years. That's what you've doubled down on.
Double-edged sword, it seems like. We've got 3 hands up, and Robin, maybe we'll go to you first. I see you, Paulina, and Ira will go next. But Robin, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question, that'd be great.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I think that Stephen's suggestion about meeting with the police departments or going to police conferences, making presentations there is a fantastic idea. It's meeting them on their space and presenting a demonstration on how they can, to work with them on how to, their goal is to get quality face recognition on camera and presumably to fight crime, but more so to get facial recognition on camera. So I think that is, if we as designers can say, you know, using the Cobra heads and overlighting the street with Cobra heads is actually diminishing the detail in your camera work, that this might begin to address that. And then bringing the scientific information about lighting and the effects on the human condition, et cetera, which they may or may not be concerned with. But still to show them how a more pedestrian scale lighting will be more effective for their camera work. Another thing is for that study that was done, I think I remember reading that the results, the study was paid for by economists rather than city officials or municipal officials. And so the results were digested and, you know, regurgitated from an economist's perspective. Yes, indeed, it is true that crime diminished within the 20 feet circumference of where these lighting fixtures, these towers were installed. But the crime just moved to an area that was not being monitored for the study. So technically, yes, we put up these lights and crime in this area where we put up the lights was reduced. Fantastic. So I just wanted to add that clarity, that extra point to that survey. And if I can just say also that on the White Cross housing estate project, I was on that workshop.
Oh, wow.
And it was a fantastic experience, more so with the guerrilla lighting, because, and that big swirly bit that you showed was one of our moments with our flashlights. We were outside of one of the buildings and had all of the community members, you know, doing different things with their flashlights, much as you did with North Station. So that guerrilla aspect is great. Now here, my last point is here in Philadelphia, we're about to embark on the changeover for the city's streetlights. So fortunately, I'm the lighting designer on that with the lighting engineers. And so they were already having a community engagement aspect to their project. And me being a community design collaborative kind of person, you know, working with community design collaborative, which is similar to the one in Boston, is that we are going to be engaging the community. And so now my other thing is with my nonprofit, we're involved with the Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations. And our CDC organization has a subgroup called the Commercial Corridor Group. So I've been speaking with the Commercial Corridor Group and saying, how can we implement a good lighting practice on our commercial corridors? And most of them did not know that this lighting retrofit or refit is going to be happening. So I'm going to suggest that we get all of our community corridor members to gather their neighbors and then create the community engagement in that way. Philadelphia has done mock-ups, but, you know, so I think that that's how, you know, I'm going to suggest we proceed. And to further add, the squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Okay.
I've been at this for a couple of years, always, and when they see me coming, it's like, oh, there's that lighting chick, you know, just keep at it. Oh, lighting is advocate, you know, evangelize, lighting, oh, lighting, pedestrian scale, you know, And so it really actually is finally, I'm hearing the words coming back to me from sources that I would not expect. So, you know, I'm here to say, let's just keep at it. We got to keep at it. Squeaky wheel gets the oil. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to say, we need to support each other because, you know, it's hard being the squeaky wheel by yourselves, right?
No one wants to squeak alone. That's for sure.
Right. No, so we need that. We need, and I would love to celebrate what you're working on, Robin, and we could all learn from that and apply it to our cities and communities. We all need to be squeaky wheels. That's a very powerful thing to be.
For sure. All right, we have 2 more hands up. So Paulina, can I ask you to unmute and ask your question?
Hello, Edward. It's Paulina,
Paulina.
from Available Light. How you doing?
Good.
This is the first time I've been at a talk of yours and a talk like this. So for me, this was, no pun intended, illuminating. But I wondered, you had used, when you were talking about the omnipresence portion of your presentation, you said, I don't know if it was, you said it could have been purposeful or neglectful. And I wrote that down here in my notes here because I wanted to know if your research, really pointed towards that, because, when you were talking about the slave laws, that feels obviously very purposeful, but how did that evolve over time into questioning whether it was negligence or purposeful? I don't know if you were being, serious with that, or did you have a gut feeling based on the research you had done?
That's a great question, Paulina. And for me, it really speaks to, and it's a term, and I want to give my colleague Mark Loeffler mention this term, infrastructural racism. And it's one of those things that's systemic, that happens due to a number of systems that are happening that coalesce and impact communities. And a lot of it is based on racism, a lot of it's based on economics, and those tend to also bleed into racism as well. So underserved, under-resourced communities, typically are Black and brown. So people may not consciously be doing this. And I think, coming from my utility background, they weren't consciously doing it, but the impact of it was clearly there. And so it's hard to discern whether people are doing it on purpose or whether it was neglectful. But the overall impact is what we kind of look at the outcomes of what happened, and then try to change them from that point. So that's kind of how I formulated in my mind about a lot of this. You're absolutely right. The lantern laws are absolutely on purpose, and those things have legacies. All those types of things have legacies, and you look at redlining and all those things. So they have impacts that can last quite some time. They're still lasting. They're still impacting us. And there's a reason why, people were out in the street after George Floyd was murdered, because they're tired of seeing that shit over and over again. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. And Ira, you've been very patient. I'm going to ask you to unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Sarah. So Edward and Glenn, thank you so much for your presentation. Really enjoyed it, and it's an important topic. And it made me think about how the IES and the IALD tend to talk about these things and these topics like this today at an IES event. But to Stephen's point about, going to a police convention or going to a landscape architectural convention and talking about this is a great way not only to disseminate the topic into the ears of others outside of the sort of mainstream lighting community, but it also would be a way of promoting lighting design for lighting designers for potential work, because the expertise is needed. So I think the cross-pollinization of these types of topics with, real estate conventions and I know nurses come back from nursing conventions asking about, hey, I heard something about circadian stimulus. What's this all about? And what does it mean to me and my staff? That we as a community need to broaden ourselves and infiltrate and cross-pollinate with other organizations so that they become more aware of these topics to help promote lighting and our profession and bring it more value. Let's hope that we can maybe you can find a way to do this presentation outside of the IES next time in another forum that might really start to broaden the audience. And just wanted to mention, if nobody has, or there's a really good book that sort of spells out some of the topics that have been broached today. If anybody's read or hasn't read Richard Rothstein's Color of Law, it talks all about the systemic racism in the housing industry in North America, starting around 1910. And so if you haven't read Richard Rothstein's book, it's a good one, The Color of Law. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
I just, I thank you, Ira. That's an excellent point and a great resource. I think absolutely, it'd be great to talk to people outside of our circle, but I also think it's important for us as lighting practitioners that we need to realize the social impact that lighting has. And I think for so long we've been focusing on the technical aspect, and yes, we're talking on the health and sustainability and the environmental aspect. There's a social impact that lighting has. We determine what spaces are valued and not valued through our practice, through our design. And we need to take responsibility for that. So one of the things that I'm trying to get off the ground and try to happen with the IES is a symposium to call some of those researchers, like those economists who put that paper out, and all these other researchers who are talking on these subjects, so that we can understand the social impact of what lighting that lighting has, and that we could discuss that from both an academic point, but then move forward and look at ways that we could implement and join in with other folks and be informed by these academics, by these anthropologists, all these different people who are coalescing and looking at lighting from these different lenses that can inform us so that we could see our impact, and then we could go to these other communities and apply that impact in a much more informed way.
I'm going to leap into the silence and say I can't wait to see what happens in that space, Edward. And I'll also ask if there's any other lingering questions. There was a comment that I will bring to light that somebody mentioned that if you're interested in learning more on the topic, there are 2 great articles that have come out in LDNA not too long ago, February recently, and help me out, the comment disappeared.
October.
October, a part 1 and a part 2.
September.
September.
Oh, September, thank you.
You can get into the archives and see those. Both are great articles. And speaking of social impacts, right in the chat, I'm hitting return right now. The next event that our chapter will be hosting also focuses on sort of the broader social impacts, and the topic is accessibility and lighting. That will be April 21st, 4:30. We've got 2 wonderful speakers from Hartranft will be speaking for us. So take a look at that. And then also, while I'm on the links in the chat, if you scroll up a little, if you're looking for the AIA credit link, you'll see the Boston IES to everyone at 5:36 is that, I'm sorry, it's a little further up. It's the Boston to everyone at 5:15. And I'll recopy that one and put it in. If you are looking for the AIA credits, you can do that. I think we got one or 2 more. There it is. There's a question. Are there any before photos of the police areas that we could possibly share?
I'm sure there are some. I'm sure because everyone has a camera now on their phone. So I do not know of any. And I think that's a really interesting thing. I know that they were responding because the stop and frisk was taken off the table. They can no longer do that practice anymore. So this was Bratton, I think it was Bratton who implemented it, police chief, the omnipresence. So that's what happened there.
Awesome. Any last questions? It was a great Q&A session. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around and participating.
Yeah.
And Ed,
once again, oh, sorry, go ahead, Cofield.
Yeah, the call for proposals for the police chiefs conference is in the chat here too.
Oh, fantastic. Whoa. Okay.
And they list community engagement as something that they want the topics to include.
Okay, where is it at? Is it in Orlando? Because I want to take my family.
October 15th, Dallas, Texas for 2022, but the call for speakers is for 2023, and I don't see that offhand.
Okay.
So we've got a little time is what you're saying. So we can form the committee, Stephen.
There you go.
All right, last call. Final call for questions. Anybody else? Last comments?
I'm gonna stop sharing after this.
Alexandra, as our president, is there any comment or closing remarks that you'd like to make before we break?
I would just like to say thank you to our speakers. This was a fantastic session, and thank you to Sarah for organizing. And as always, thank you to Cofield and Ben for providing the IT support that makes our virtual events possible.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all.
Appreciate your support.
And thank you too. Putting these together takes so much time and energy on top of everything else that you both do, wearing all the hats that you do. So thank you for helping to educate us, and hopefully we'll have a chance to carry this forward. It seems like there's a lot of actionable items for us. So thanks once again for making our sections shine.